So, Hillel, thank you so much for joining me here in my podcast studio.
Thanks for having me.
First and foremost, I'd like to extend my deepest condolences to the Israeli people and to the Jewish people after the 7th of October. Awful, awful terror attack. I actually have no words. Words finds no meaning in trying to describe the sadistic, terrible event that happened. I'd like to start with you. How are you? How are you? And after that kind of attack in your family and the people that you know?
Yeah, well, we're in a different place than we were before October 7th. I think probably most Jews worldwide are in a different place. Those who are have some connection to Israel, but also if they identify as Jews, it's a very scary time. So first there's the Israel part, and then there's being Jewish outside of Israel. So in Israel, I actually was visiting at the time in Jerusalem when the war began. So I was having, it was Saturday morning, I was having, which was the Jewish Shabbat, the Jewish Sabbath. It happened to be also a holiday, Simchat Torah. It's the day of the year where they celebrate the giving of the Bible, the Torah, to the Jewish people. So it's a celebration day. It's a day where you rejoice with the Torah. And finish every year, once a week in synagogue, they read one portion of the 5 books of Moses, of the Pentateuch. And then at the end of the year, you finish the whole thing. So each week you read one chapter. And that's the time of the year when you finish the whole Torah. So the scroll is complete. And then you begin again reading Genesis. It's an ongoing process. Every year you keep reading the Bible, the story of creation of the world, Abraham, and so forth. And so there was a day meant to be celebration. It was 8 o'clock in the morning, and suddenly sirens went off. And I ran with my friend into the bomb shelter, and we didn't know what was happening. And rockets were landing, thankfully not on us. And then we learned later in the day that it wasn't just rockets, but that there was this horrible attack. And one had a disgusting feeling because indeed, as you said, the acts that were committed are awful, and they're despicable and sadistic, and people were mutilated and burned and raped and really disgusting things. And it was a new level of depravity that we had not seen at that scale for since the Holocaust, targeting Jewish people. Obviously, it's happened in other places in the world, but still, in terms of a mass terrorist attack on one day of this kind of sadism and torture, the world hasn't seen so many cases like this, certainly in the Western world, quasi-Western world. So it's very depressing to wake up and know that there are millions of people who want to do this, because in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, according to polls, I don't know if it was 75%, maybe the West Bank Palestinians support this action. Hamas leaders went on the TV and said, October 7th, we're going to do it again and again and again. So to wake up every day and know that these horrible things happen to children, to women, I'm not going to discuss the details because it's hard for me to discuss them, but things that were done to pregnant people, older people in front of their families, it's just awful. And as you said, there are no words. And so to wake up each morning and say this happened, the ruling authority in Gaza did this. They have support of millions of people around the world, and they are just across the street from Israel. They're meters away for a fence that they were able to easily, destroy. It's you wake up in a world where you have to fear that it's going to happen again. When I was in Jerusalem, when the war began, there was this fear. Maybe there are Hamas people here in Jerusalem. Maybe some of the terrorists didn't just make it to the south, but Israel's a very small country, so the southern border to Jerusalem is an hour away, maybe. And so the sense of security was that we're all targeted. And I'll just jump quickly and then I'll stop talking. But then there's, around the world. So I live in Switzerland, but I grew up in Montreal. So I'll just mention those 2 places as examples. So if you're Jewish in those places, first you feel terrible about what happened to your brothers and sisters in Israel. Either many people have cousins and family members in Israel, which I do. But then you are also, in your own country, suddenly thousands of people started marching in the streets and basically supporting Hamas in one form or other, cheering them on in one form or other. And then, in Geneva, we had many dozens and dozens of anti-Semitic actions, ranging from kids in a school being insulted because they're Jewish, in a public school to, swastikas being painted and other forms of more aggressive actions to, just 2 hours away in Lyon, France, a woman was stabbed on a Saturday and a swastika was painted on her door. That's in my area in Geneva. People feel very embattled if you're Jewish, and people are afraid to be publicly Jewish. In Montreal, where I grew up, which is an amazing city, Canada is one of the great countries of the world. In Montreal, in the past few weeks, there's one school where my brothers went to this school, a Jewish school. They had, someone went by with a gun and shot bullets at the main door overnight. So no one was killed, but they shot bullets overnight, one school. And then they shot at another Jewish school on let's say it was Wednesday night. And then a few days later, this was shocking, bullets fired at a Jewish school. And then a few days later, on a Saturday night, again, one of the schools, someone came and shot again at the school. You'd think the person would be afraid to do it a second time. Now there's police, but no. Then Molotov cocktail was thrown at a synagogue, another Molotov cocktail at a Jewish community center. This is about 2 weeks ago. And then 3 days ago, a Molotov cocktail thrown at another Jewish community center. So this is terrorism in Montreal, again, one of the most peaceful places in the world, we thought. And the response of the government is we're looking into it and the police, but you're not seeing a firm, this is really a crisis. Justin Trudeau, when he faced massive protests during COVID, these truckers who did a whole protest, they announced that anyone who supports the truckers, who came to Ottawa and did a big protest, anyone who supports the truckers, we are freezing their bank accounts. And they froze, I don't know, thousands, I don't know what the numbers are, of bank accounts in Canada. And it seemed to be a vast over-exaggeration for people who were donating to something. But when he wanted to do something, boy, he really could do something. And here he's saying, well, this is not what Canada is. We all need to come together. Some kind of, let's come and sing peace songs. But to see firm action from the government against terrorism in Montreal, I'm not seeing the firm response. So just to wrap up, it's difficult to be Jewish since October 7th. Jews around the world feel embattled.
It's so paradoxical because you'd think it was the other way around, like such a horrible attack. You think that people would have empathy and support Israel and support Jews all around the world after that.
You're right. You're right. And that's what Jews thought too. And certainly in America today, it's, victimhood gives you credibility. So if I'm a person of color, I'm a victim. If I'm LGBT, I'm a victim. That in the hierarchy of victimhood, that gives you credit and points and gives you status. And so Jews thought the same thing, but it's not the case. And I'm reminded in the 1930s, without making analogies of where the situation is for Jews today, is it 1939, is it 1933? As Hitler ramped up his targeting of the Jews, there ought to have been sympathy around the world, but actually the other anti-Semites around the world got empowered and encouraged. And when the lamb cries out, the other wolves get excited. The wolves get excited. So what we're seeing around the world is we saw this massive pogrom of Jews being mutilated and burned, and the wolves around the world got excited and came out to the streets. And Jews are afraid to have a mezuzah, which is a piece of parchment with some quotes from the Torah that is put outside a Jewish door as commanded in the Bible. And that's a sign of being Jewish, or people wear a kippah. People are afraid to do these things because the wolves are excited. And that's the fear. We're seeing these anti-Semitic passions have been unleashed. And it's a very dangerous time for the world because anti-Semitism, the irrational passions of anti-Semitism, its first target is the Jews. But we saw in the 1940s, first targets may be the Jews. But when these pathologies of hate are unleashed, it doesn't end with the Jews. It ends with tens of millions of others. And the Hamas terrorists, their first target is the Jews. But in terms of Western society, and whether it's women or minorities or Christians or whoever's not Islamic, what Hamas does to their own people, when Fatah were being shot in the hospitals, when Hamas took over, you can ask them what Hamas is capable of. So I think it's a dangerous time in the world.
I listen to Ben Shapiro a lot, who is really famous around the world, especially in the United States, I think. And he said that, paraphrasing, but he said that, I thought I'd never say this, but Hamas is actually worse than the Nazis, because at least the Nazis tried to cover up their atrocities after World War II, while these guys are proud of it. They even GoPro'd it, filming it while they were doing it, and are proud.
Yes, it has been said, indeed, others have said that the Nazis knew that in some parts of German society, if what they had done were published, there'd be some shame and embarrassment that are we doing this, really? So the strategy was to keep it silent, maybe have some hints. Some people knew what was going on, but not to show it. And here in the jihadi culture, showing, like ISIS, I guess, began doing this by filming the beheadings. That became a popular thing in jihadi culture. And somehow the fact that Hamas is proudly boasting with their GoPros and showing it around the world, they don't seem to be paying much of a price. You either have people who are just denying it, saying, I need more proof, and there's already plenty of proof that they were showing it, or you see people who are supposed to be the paragons of human rights, people like Greta, is supposed to be a climate activist, and she's standing in Stockholm a week ago at a rally saying, what are we going to do? Crush Zionism. And she's saying, crush Zionism. When are we going to do it? Now. Israel murderers. And basically taking on the side of Hamas. Again, completely irrational. And some of the pathologies of our time where some activists are so anti-society, so anti-Western, that anyone who's seen as against it, they'll embrace them. And we've seen these things before, and they're very dangerous.
How are people able to square that in their own minds? That a lot of people saying, you see that there's plaques saying that, hey, I'm not anti-Semitic, but I'm anti-Zionist. Well, how are they able to square that in their minds?
Yeah, look, it's a distinction without a difference. You can come up with some academic theory in certainly in 1900, when Zionism was beginning as an idea, to say, well, that's not my proposal. I have a different proposal. But today, Zionism is not a theory. It's nearly 10 million Israelis, which include maybe nearly 7-8 million Jews, about 2 million Arabs, Muslims, Christians, Druze, and so forth. And Zionism is the right of the Jewish people to have their own state. The state exists. So if you're against Zionism, you're against Israel, you're against Israelis. You could be against Japanism. It's not an idea, but there's a people called Japan. They live there. If you're against it, you're against those people. So to be anti-Zionist, to say that crush Zionism at a time when Hamas says we want to destroy Israel and we will mutilate and burn and rape people, and at that same time you stand up as a public figure and say, I want to crush Zionism, you have to know the context. And to still do that is shocking.
I feel like Zionism justifies itself now more than ever, because it's obvious that Jews and Israelis need a place to stay that's safe. Like, they need a country. Like, Israel justifies its own existence just by 7th of October.
Precisely. If you are anti-Zionist and you hate the idea of Israel, and you say your dream is to have Mahmoud Abbas or the leaders of Hamas ruling Israel and turning it into Palestine, and that's your idea of paradise, and everything will be great if we return to pre-1948, then the last thing you'd want to do is to make Jews around the world feel terribly unsafe, where basically every Jew around the world is afraid of their security. And you have many Jews that I've met who said, I feel insecure here in Berlin because we've seen, pro-Taliban and pro-Hamas rallies by immigrants that we some cases it's Muslim immigrants who are there. Other times it's people like Greta, who are Western people who stand with them. It's a combination of them and the Jeremy Corbyns of this world who support Hamas. He calls them his friends. So when people see these things, I've heard people say, I don't feel secure in Berlin. It's true in Israel, there's thousands of rockets landing there. It's true that Hamas and Iran want to destroy Israel. But at least I'm in a country where I know the country will do everything to defend me. I'm in the country of my Jewish people homeland. So all of the anti-Semitism that we're seeing only indeed strengthens the case why Israel does need a shelter for Jews worldwide.
Which countries do you feel like are are having the strongest stance against terrorism, against Hamas after this. I feel like I watched the prime minister of, not the prime minister, but one of the ministers of Germany, who had a really fine speech where he took a really good stance and said that we stand with Israel. I don't remember which guy it was, but
might
I
have been the
remember
defense
saying-
minister.
Yeah, defense
I think it was the
minister,
defense
yeah. So Germany is taking a stance on this.
Yes. I would say, in if you go around the world, there are things happening in society. There are things that certain anti-Israel people are doing. Sometimes these are new immigrants from the Middle East who maybe we were a bit naive thinking you just take 1 million people from the Middle East, from a place like Syria where they've been brought up on hate, and you don't think about what ideas they're going to bring with them and how that's going to change things. And you may have problems from a certain population, but the government is completely the opposite. So Germany is a good example. In Germany, there's a very serious danger about certain sectors of the population that are viciously anti-Israel and anti-Semitic, and where Jews are afraid now. And it's ironic because Angela Merkel, in part because of guilt from the Holocaust, said sincerely she wanted to do a humanitarian gesture and to bring in refugees, which is a very noble, sincere thing. But reality, ironically, paradoxically, unintentionally, she may have made life impossible for Jews, having brought people from a place like Syria, where they may have radical views supporting the Islamic regime of Iran, Hezbollah. They're present in Germany in large numbers. So that's something. But the German government, indeed, as you said, has been very strong in trying to protect the Jews, in banning certain movements like Hezbollah that they didn't ban effectively before. So I think there is a very strong message from the German government that they are trying to protect the Jewish population. Certainly from the Czech government, it's a small Jewish population, but you've had some very strong statements of support for Israel. The British government had some very strong statements. So those are some countries that come to mind. The U.S. government has made strong statements, though Biden, from time to time, there is this thing in America in certain progressive milieus where anti-Semitism is condemned, and right afterwards they say also Islamophobia. In one ridiculous case, there was the home of Rahm Emanuel, the former mayor of Chicago, was targeted by some anti-Semitic vandalism. And David Axelrod, the former Obama advisor, put out a tweet, and he said, "This is shameful. This is a terrible thing. We need to condemn anti-Semitism." There was like a swastika against a Jew, Rahm Emanuel. And he said, "We need to condemn anti-Semitism and Islamophobia." There's no Islamophobia. It has nothing to do. But somehow the political legitimacy to speak out against anti-Semitism is seen as somehow that Muslims will get upset, and it's an important sector, and politically it's not correct. And you have to always say Islamophobia, which, no one would say, after a black was killed or targeted, you'd say you have to stop anti-black racism and also, racism against anyone else in America. It's called All Lives Matter. For some reason, there are some sectors, including the UN, where they don't seem to have the courage. They feel they don't have the courage, and that there's so much pushback if they dare to condemn anti-Semitism. Just the other day, Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, António Guterres, he finally spoke about the mass rape that we're getting reports now. Many of the women were killed, but there are witnesses and forensic evidence that rape was systematic. Both the women who were at the music festival, the young women, and other women from the kibbutzim were raped by Hamas people, and that this was systematic. And for the first time, Guterres made a tweet about this issue yesterday, and he said, finally, after 53 days, he said, this needs to be investigated properly. And then the second paragraph of his tweet said, anytime there's gender-based violence happens, this needs to be condemned. Anytime, anywhere. We call in America, all lives matter. So somehow he said something about Israel, and he had to tell his constituency, of course, I would do this for all sides. So don't think I'm only condemning. So that there's something very strange about that.
I was really disappointed in the UN after the 7th of October because, as I remember, they were going to vote on whether or not to condemn the attacks of the 7th of October, and they found that they wouldn't condemn it.
Yeah.
Could you explain that? What happened there?
Well, indeed, there was a resolution brought at the General Assembly, and Canada introduced an amendment to have a specific condemnation of Hamas for the atrocities of October 7th. And it did receive a majority, but not the requisite 2/3 majority for this procedural amendment. And therefore it failed. And then the full resolution, without the amendment, did not have a condemnation of Hamas. And that passed. And the principled position to take at that time was to say, no, if we're going to pass a resolution and not have express condemnation of Hamas for the atrocities, we don't vote for this resolution. That is what the Czech Republic did. That's what the United States did, Croatia, Hungary, a few other countries. Many of the EU abstained, which in my opinion is a weak situation. And I believe Norway, if I'm not mistaken, actually voted yes for the resolution, which is unfortunate. It sends the wrong message.
Yeah. What do you think about that the UN found that they would not, and as a result, not condemn it? What do you think about it?
Well, I think it's a moral failure. Let's recall the origins of the United Nations. On December 10th, 2023, we're going to mark the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This document was adopted in the wake of the Nazi atrocities of World War II. The Nazis were defeated by the Allies, and the United Nations was created. And then shortly thereafter, they began to write the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the preamble begins before establishing the right to life and the right to liberty and equality and against racism and torture. The preamble says this is created in response to barbarous acts which outraged the conscience of mankind. This was the prompt for the catalyst for the Universal Declaration, of course, was World War II, the Holocaust, the atrocities that happened there. And so this is a chance for the world to come together and reaffirm the principles of human dignity. So this is what the United Nations is founded upon. The United Nations was founded with tremendous moral clarity. FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, it was his vision to have the United Nations. It was the best principles of liberal internationalism to create a new world of those of us who defeated the Nazis. Couldn't have more moral purpose of clarity to speak out for human dignity and against Nazi evil. Those are the victors. The Allies were initially called the United Nations. Before there was the organization, the Allies in the 1940s called themselves the United Nations. So really the UN is the Allies who defeated Hitler, and you have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So these are the principles of the United Nations. And from time to time, they are upheld. We've seen strong action on Russia, not enough, but the General Assembly has condemned Russia's war in Ukraine. Russia was removed from the Human Rights Council, thankfully, a campaign that we initiated. So from time to time, the UN will stand up for its true values. But we're seeing, in the case of the Middle East, in the case of the Arab-Israel conflict, time and again, the UN main bodies have been hijacked. We see that the Islamic states, which are 56 Islamic states, includes Iran, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Lebanon, Pakistan, Qatar, they dominate many of these institutions. They introduce the resolutions. They have the power of oil, 56 states. They have votes. I vote for you, you vote for me. It's 56 states and one group. The Jewish group of countries is 56-1, vote trading. They have sovereign wealth funds. If you want Qatar to give you billions of dollars for your economy, if you vote against the resolution, you can suffer, and they use it. Terrorism. If you're one of the dozen countries that may not vote for these resolutions, maybe your country will suffer terrorism. All of this is realpolitik. May not like it, but that's the way the world works. And we see that sadly the UN has been overtaken. It's now for decades. We have, on the Human Rights Council, the members. We reformed it in 2006, created the new and improved Human Rights Council. We scrapped the old Commission on Human Rights had Gaddafi's ambassador as the chair in 2003, right? Eleanor Roosevelt, 1948, 2003, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, representative of Libya. And then it was reformed in 2006. We scrapped the Commission on Human Rights, created the new and improved Human Rights Council. Here we are in 2023. Who are the members of the Human Rights Council? China, Cuba, Qatar, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Bangladesh.
Iran?
Iran was made chair of the UN Human Rights Council Social Forum last month. And the chair said, the chair from the Human Rights Council said this, well, we had to appoint them. They're the only candidate. Well, that's a silly answer. You can get another candidate, But the international community, other than the United States and some MEPs in Brussels, no one objected. Islamic Republic of Iran, beating, blinding, torturing women of their own country, made chair of a UN Human Rights Forum just a month ago. So sadly, the UN, when it comes to this conflict with Hamas, they once again have shown a failed moral judgment. Typically, they blame Israel. without mentioning that Hamas is using human shields. They typically don't mention that thousands of rockets have been fired at Israel, and Israel's trying to stop the rockets. They, at best, they make a moral equation where they'll say, okay, Israel is now getting its hostages released, a 10-month-old baby. Maybe, we don't know what happened to the baby, but maybe the 10-month-old baby will be returned, and Israel will return its hostages. It's not the word they use, but that's the implication. Whereas Israel has detained convicted terrorists, suicide bombers, would-be suicide bombers. Sometimes it's a minor who's 17 or 16 years old, someone who was trying to stab people. To equate that with a 3-year-old child who was taken by Hamas is ridiculous. So we're seeing a failure of basic moral judgment by the UN, an organization that founded on the best principles. Too often, not always, but too often, their own principles are being betrayed.
There's a video of you that went viral, I think it was 2017 in UN, where you were talking about, where you were asking the UN, was it General Assembly?
Human Rights Council.
Human Rights Council, where you were asking, like, Algeria, you had 140,000 Jews, where are your Jews? Egypt, you had 75,000 Jews, where are your Jews? Iraq, you had 135,000 Jews, where are your Jews? Could you explain a little bit about that? What is it that about, and why don't they have any Jews anymore? What is it about?
Yeah, well, actually, this is the day to talk about it. You know, the United Nations yesterday was November 29th. That was the day in 1947 when the United Nations General Assembly voted to partition what was British mandatory Palestine into partition plan, 2 states, a Jewish state and an Arab state. There had never been an independent Arab state in Palestine, maybe since the Arabs invaded in the 7th century and came to Palestine. But it was under the British, it was under the Ottomans, it was under the Mamluks, the Crusaders, and so forth. For the first time, there's going to be a Palestinian Arab state and a Jewish state. A Jewish state after 2,000 years of exile. The Jews immediately embraced it, even though their holiest sites were excluded from the plan. Jerusalem was not included. Hebron, where the patriarchs and the matriarchs are buried, also excluded. But the Jews said, we have sovereignty, we have independence, we accept it. The Jews danced in the streets in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and the Arabs declared war. The Arabs in British Mandatory Palestine and their neighboring Arab countries. So first there was a civil war everywhere in the area, in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, in Haifa. The Jews and Arabs had a civil war. And then after, when the British left, May 14th, the next day the Arab states invaded Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and so forth. So that was November 29th, 1947. The vote for the partition, the Arabs declaring war against the partition plan and against the nascent Jewish state. The next day, many parts of the Arab world saw pogroms break out. You had in Aleppo dozens of Jews killed, hanged, lynched. In Aden, in Yemen, pogroms happening there. In Iraq, throughout the Arab world, in wake of that vote, Arabs became inflamed in the Middle East and began to conduct pogroms against Jews. This began an exodus of about 800,000 to 900,000 Jews, communities that had existed for 2,500 years. This is going before Islam. The Jews who were in Iraq are there long before Islam. The Talmud was written in much of it was written in Babylon. It's called in Hebrew it's called the Talmud Bavli. It was when Jews were there in the 3rd century and 4th century and 5th century. Jews were in Iraq from time immemorial. The same with Iran. You know, the story of the Book of Esther. You know, these are going back thousands of years, long before Islam. So we are talking about historic Jewish communities throughout the Middle East, in North Africa, in Yemen. Again, the Jews there go back thousands of years. In Egypt, and they were all pushed out through these pogroms, either beginning in 47, 48, or things escalated in 56. The Jews from Egypt left, so that today, indeed, in neighborhoods, in regions of the Middle East that had hundreds of thousands of Jews, they're basically Judenrein. So there are no Jews left in Iraq. There are basically no Jews in Egypt. A synagogue was renovated recently, and there were, I think, 2 Jews who came to be there for the thing. These were great communities in Cairo and Alexandria. Algeria had so many Jews. They're all gone. Morocco still has some. The Moroccan government has today, the government has a friendly approach towards Jews, but historically, with the population, it was complicated. So that's the reality, is that Jews were chased out. And November 30th is a time that Israel, about in 2014, finally declared Jewish Refugees Day to commemorate the suffering and exodus of about 900,000 Jewish refugees. And it's worthwhile to take a look at what happened. The Jewish refugees was tragic. They had to flee, leaving behind their property, their culture, their history, their communities. There are no refugees today. You will not meet an Algerian Jewish refugee. You will not meet an Iraqi Jewish refugee, because 600,000 of them were taken in by Israel, and others were resettled in Canada, the United States, and France, and the UK, and other countries. So the Jewish refugees moved on with their lives and are now productive citizens in these countries. The Palestinian refugees who fled during the conflict, either because they were told to leave because the Arab states' armies were going to destroy the Jews, or because they were pushed out during military clashes with the Haganah and the Israeli army at the time, the Arab refugees could have been resettled and begun new lives. They went to places like Lebanon, which is, right next to Israel, Palestine. So we're talking about kilometers away, speaking the same Arabic language, worshiping the same Muslim religion, having the same culture. Indeed, an Arab in Palestine, if you asked them in the 20s, where are you? Most of them were rural and didn't really have a national identity. They had a tribal identity. But if anything, they called themselves Syrians. When they had their first meeting in the 20s, they called themselves maybe the Arabs of southern Syria. So when they were going to Lebanon or Syria, they were part of the same culture. They were not received. They instead of being integrated, absorbed, and resettled with new lives, it emerged due to the position of various stakeholders that their problem will not be solved. They will not be resettled. On the contrary, they'll be kept like an open wound, like a beggar who says, "Look at my wound, give me money." The Arab dictatorships began to use them as a tool of propaganda. This is the 48 war that we, the Arab dictatorships, lost. But here are the suffering Palestinians. This is the crimes of the Jews. And they need to go back to undo the shame of 1948. And so just coming back to you asked about my speech, we see that I said it during a debate of the Human Rights Council where the Arab states were accusing Israel of racism and apartheid endlessly. And I was looking at them, and I'm looking at the Algerian ambassador, and I'm looking at the Syrian ambassador, I'm looking at the Iraqi ambassador. And I'm saying, really? You're accusing Israel of apartheid? There are problems in Israel. There's racism in all countries. There's discrimination in all countries. But Israel, despite being at war with Arab states, Arab citizens have full equality in Israel. They vote in Israeli elections, something that no one can vote in a democracy and in the Arab world. They are elected. Indeed, there was an Islamic Arab party that was part of the coalition of the previous government, a man named Abbas. They are judges on the Supreme Court. They are doctors. Disproportionate amount of doctors are Arab doctors. Jews can be treated very well from Arab doctors in Israeli hospitals. Arab pharmacists, many of them are in the pharmaceutical industry. Of course, there are problems. They're a minority. They have problems, but they have their basic democratic rights. It is not an apartheid state. And of course, the situation in the Palestinian territory is very complicated. The Oslo Accords, we're speaking in Oslo, divided the area into Palestinian jurisdictions, Israeli jurisdictions, settlements, and the Palestinians have not accepted a state that was offered to them at Camp David and so forth. So when these Arab states were accusing Israel of apartheid, I looked at them and I said, really? Really? Israel has problems, but there's equality. There's equal treatment for Arabs. If you want to talk about apartheid, I said, indeed, Algeria, you had 140,000 Jews. Where are your Jews? And there was silence.
Yeah, the room went silent after that.
Yeah.
Did they respond at all? Did you get any kind of comment or anything?
No response.
And also, wasn't it that time that also the leader of the UN in that room said that this is inadmissible? Was that the same?
That's another speech.
Yeah?
Different time. That was in 2007. The chair was, at that time, so it's 10 years prior, the chair was a Mexican ambassador, Luis Alfonso de Alba. There it was after the first year of the Human Rights Council, and he was relishing in the glory of being the founding chair of the new and improved Human Rights Council. And all they did in the first year was condemn Israel. There was no resolution on China. There was none on Russia, none on North Korea, only against Israel. And at some point, I spoke out. And I said, this is the council founded by Eleanor Roosevelt and René Cassin, and they had a dream. And I spoke about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I said how crimes are happening in Darfur, you're ignoring them. and in different parts of the world, and you ignore them. And all you do is condemn Israel. And if Israel can't be blamed, you couldn't care less, including what happens to Palestinians. Palestinians who are targeted, if you can't blame Israel, if it's Hamas, if it's the PA, they don't say anything. I said, Eleanor Roosevelt's dream is turning into a nightmare. And he got very offended, the chair, and he said, for the first time ever, I will not thank you, because the protocol is to thank the speaker and move to the next speaker. And I got up because I have to give up my seat to the next NGO. He said, no, I'm talking to you. So I had to come back. He never talks back. He just says, thank you, next. He said, no, I'm talking to you. So they told me, Hillel, he's talking to you. So I sat down. He said, what you said is unacceptable. It's inadmissible. What you said about the founders, I praised the founders. I criticized his generation of human rights chairpersons. And he said, it's unacceptable, it's inadmissible, and if you ever say something in these tones again, I will strike it from the records. So we called it the banned speech. This is a speech I cannot deliver again. Anyway, this is in 2007. YouTube had just begun. There wasn't really social media then. There wasn't social media, it was just YouTube. So we said, oh, you know what? It's for the first time, the council sessions are on video. There's this new thing called YouTube. Let's put it up. Because actually, when he finished speaking, I was embarrassed because he never calls out anyone. And the whole room was turning their heads, looking at me. I'm in the back of the room. It's this massive chamber of the United Nations. Everyone's looking at me. And an American friend of mine came up to me and said, Hill, I'm shocked that, you have freedom of speech. And how could he say that to you? And I said, yeah. And I walked out and I thought about it. I thought about it for a moment. And I said, well, this whole year, when the Iranian representative celebrated a Holocaust denial conference, he said, thank you. When Cuba said, we hate the UN expert who criticized Cuba, we're going to throw her report in the garbage bin of history, he said, thank you. And when anti-Semitic things, he said, thank you. In my speech, he said, por primera vez, for the first time, I will not thank you. So, let's put it up on YouTube. We put it on YouTube, and there was no sharing, because there was no Twitter, there was no Instagram. It was just on YouTube. But people would, in the old days, in the ancient times, people would email each other a YouTube link. Yeah. And it went viral. And it got seen several 100,000 times. And we were a small group in Geneva, started getting phone calls and emails and donations. And then newspapers, a dozen newspapers around the world, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Sun, Australian newspaper, Canada's National Post, leading blogs were writing about it. It goes, something dramatic happened. The Wall Street Journal wrote a whole editorial about it. Several newspapers covered the speech. The UN was very embarrassed. I was seen as speaking simple words of truth, and that the chairman was seen as someone who's putting his hands over his ears.
Was the chairman allowed to talk like that and to say that it was admissible? Was that within his scope of jurisdiction to tell you that it's inadmissible, or was he acting outside the rule of law within that?
The chairman has a role to say what's admissible. His judgment was faulty. I said nothing wrong. I didn't insult any person. I said the council's actions were criminal. Certainly that's strong language. But I talked about them turning a blind eye to atrocities in Darfur, genocide in Darfur. Again, we showed how really, truly awful things were said by many other speakers. And all of those things his response was, thank you. So if there was a standard, he clearly wasn't applying it.
Did it get any consequences for him? Did he lose his job?
No. At the council, again, this is a council where the majority is typically dictatorships. And then you have other countries like, some of the Scandinavian countries who say, well, we don't want to criticize dictatorships. Everyone should be there. They don't take a strong stand. So it's very rare, especially an NGO like me, because I'm controversial, because I'm speaking out against a lot of the hypocrisies. We're an easy target. And so we're not going to get too many countries standing up for us. Sometimes we get a few when we get interrupted. Sometimes we'll have some Western democracies will speak up for us. But in this case, the chairman was certainly roundly criticized in the international opinion. He was embarrassed. He wrote about it in his memoirs. It's kind of funny. A few years later, I noticed he wrote in his memoirs. He said, he said, my advisor, the bureaucrat, told me I should reject the speech from the beginning because they used to ask me to see the text in advance because they knew that I was going to say words of truth. So they would make me give the text in advance. They said we needed it for the interpreters. It's not true. The UN interpreters, they don't need it in advance. They can do it live all the time. So he had my text in advance. Actually, if you see the speech, it's called the banned speech on YouTube. Before I even begin, he takes his arms and he goes like this, and he gives me a really stern look, as we call it in the Seinfeld episode, the stink eye. He gives me the stink eye before I begin because he already saw the speech. And he said, I was advised not to let the speech go on. He said, but I believe in free speech. So I let the speech go, but then afterwards I reproached him. And he said, and I spoke to NGOs and they told me I'm okay. Meaning he spoke to some of the other groups. Some of them are radical left and who don't like us. And so he said, they told me that I'm okay.
Can you explain why? What do you think? Why didn't they want that speech to go on? Why was it inadmissible? Do you have any idea why?
Why for him or why for the other NGOs?
Both, I guess.
Yeah. Well, for him, I could see for him, he was the founding chair of the Human Rights Council. So it went on his CV, and he was a very polished diplomat. And I remember some female interns thought he was a handsome guy. So he was enjoying the moment.
So ego, basically.
He was enjoying the moment, and he would read the newspapers, and he would see in the International Herald Tribune, there's this guy, Hillel Neuer, who's written an op-ed. There used to be a newspaper called the International Herald Tribune in 2007. It was the international version of the New York Times and the Boston Globe together. It was a very prominent newspaper. And so he's reading the International New York Times, and there's an op-ed by Hillel Neuer saying the Human Rights Council hasn't done a thing about Darfur, hasn't done a thing about Iran, about Syria, about North Korea. And the members are some of the worst dictatorships. And his image of being a paragon of virtue was punctured. So he didn't like me. And he didn't like what I had to say because it was exposing a lot of the hypocrisies and failures of the council. So I understand why he didn't like it. It was against his interest. It was against the image that he had cultivated. Of course, he says that some NGOs agreed with him privately. And sadly, that it raises another issue, which we didn't talk about. We talked about dictatorships, but I did mention this irrational radical left. I mentioned Jeremy Corbyn. So this ideology of Corbynism is a pathology that we have in Western society, where someone who ostensibly, according to their own values, should be for equal rights for women, should be for equal rights of gay people, equal rights of minorities. This should be their flag. They say, Jeremy Corbyn says, Hamas are my friends. These are his literal words. Hamas and Hezbollah are my friends. I tried to bring them to parliament and it wasn't allowed. They are my friends. They are social, they're trying to bring social justice. Now I'm paraphrasing, but it's language very much of this kind. He said they're our friends, and they're trying to bring social justice. So these are mass murderers. Hezbollah participated in the mass murder in Syria. Hamas, we saw a mass murder of 1,200 people, rape, mutilation. These are his friends. So this is real. He means it. Let's take people seriously when they say certain words. Now, Jeremy Corbyn is part of a milieu. He was the head of the Labour Party, but he comes from the Trotskyist or more radical left in England. And one of his peers is Ken Livingstone, who was known as Red Ken, also from the radical left background, socialist background, who was the mayor of London. And he says that the Zionists were Nazis. This is his thing a few years ago, and he likes saying it, and he knows he's provoking Jews. And he says, yeah, the Zionists are Nazis. They were friends. They're Zionism and Nazism have a thing together. There's a certain milieu. I mentioned NGOs. So I just want to give you the sociology. Ken Livingstone's wife, common law wife for 20 years, was Kate Allen, who was the head of Amnesty International in the UK for many, many years. So these are demographically, sociologically the same people in the same camp. And we shouldn't be surprised that Amnesty International has been one of the basic, playing defense for Hamas for the past several years. Anything Israel does to respond to Hamas rockets, terrorist attack, massacres against international law, anything. Amnesty has never said a better way that Israel could conform to international law, stopping rockets being fired at them from Gaza, stopping terrorists. Time and again, their rhetoric is comparable to what Iran says. If you hear Iran's speech at the Human Rights Council accusing Israel of apartheid and war crimes and genocide, you hear the Amnesty International speech, it's the same speech. I was supposed to debate Amnesty International about 5 or 6 years ago in London. The Jewish community of London was having discussions with Amnesty because of some anti-Semitism by one of their activists, and they agreed to have a debate with someone from the Jewish community. The Jewish community of London proposed me. to come from Geneva, and I was supposed to come. And Amnesty said, no, we changed our mind. We're not going to do the debate. But you can have our venue, nice conference center, the Amnesty Conference Center, and you could do your own event. So we got someone else, a gentleman named Fred Carver from the UN Association of the UK. The question was, is the UN fair in its treatment of Israel? I was going to say no, and the UN Association of the UK was going to say yes. And we're going to have it in the Amnesty International Conference Center. And a few days before the event, on Friday evening, Amnesty writes to the Jewish community of London, called the Jewish Leadership Network, I think is their name, Jewish Leadership Council, an umbrella group of 34 Jewish charities. They say, we're canceling the event. We can't host you in our premises because you, the Jewish community, you support settlements. They don't say anything about settlements. They found a speech that the leader of the community said about Jerusalem, and you support settlements. This will put at risk our partners on the ground. We can't have you. So we're canceling the event a few days before. It was a big scandal. It was in the Guardian newspaper. It was reported in Haaretz and other newspapers. They couldn't host the umbrella group of Jewish communities in their venue. This is the same Amnesty International that regularly does events with Islamophobes. With people speaking out against Islamophobia who happen to be supporters of Hezbollah, who are anti-gay, who are Holocaust deniers. And they were asked about it. How in Brussels could you do an event with this homophobic Holocaust deniers? We're fighting together Islamophobia. That's our issue. We're not on other things. So they're willing to do business with all kinds of terrible people, but to let the Jewish community rent their venue in London, they said, no, we can't even let you come, or they wouldn't let me come. So sadly, it doesn't shock me that on October 17th, when there was a false report that Israel bombed the Al-Ali hospital and killed 500 people, all false, put out by Hamas, Amnesty International Secretary General Agnes Callamard immediately shared the story. False story. It wasn't Israel. It was a jihad rocket, and it wasn't 500 people. Maybe it was 10 people. She shared the story. The head of Human Rights Watch's Middle East Department, Omar Shakir, head of the Israel-Palestine division, he shares the story. He says, I've been to morgues. I've seen mass killings. The scenes I'm seeing, I have no words, abject horror, against Israel, the hospital. It wasn't Israel. It wasn't 500 people killed. It was all a lie. Both of those tweets are still up on their account. Agnes Callamard, Omar Shakir, false stories. So sadly, to wrap up, is our leading human rights groups, cited by all the major newspapers as the spokespersons of human rights, are part of this Jeremy Corbynism, which is a radical left ideology that, as a matter of theology, sees Israel as evil.
It's almost like it's such a basic premise, like a binary premise, where people tend to see the weak equals good and the strong equals bad. And if you only see the world like that, then you see that, Israel, they have a lot of advanced military, they're a democracy, they're friends with the United States, they're strong, probably bad country. You see Palestinians, they throw rocks, they're poor, probably good people. Like if you only see the world through that kind of black and white, unsophisticated narrative, and you try to place everything you see into those two camps, then you can't get anywhere else. That's if that's all you see.
Yes, absolutely. There is, maybe it's coming from Marxism. Maybe there's other precursors, but in Marxism, obviously there was the two classes, and one class was the good and one class was the bad. And today, indeed, it's in America, it's white privilege, and somehow two things happen here that are strange. First, you divide the world into two. And then you decide arbitrarily who goes in what groups. So in America, if you're in the group of white privilege, you're bad. And the Jews in Europe were told you're not white, and the Nazis are going to kill you because you're not white. And the Jews in America couldn't get into country clubs, and Canada too, because you're not white, you're something else. But the moment white became something bad, then the Jews, actually, you are white. So it's an arbitrary division, which is not rational. It's not based on any moral judgment of what you've done or not done. It's racial, which is disgusting, because if you really are anti-racist, you don't judge someone by the race or their color. You judge them by the character, as Martin Luther King said, not by the color of their skin. So first, it's this irrational, immoral division of oppressed versus oppressor, and then it's the completely arbitrary who goes in what camp. And somehow the Jews, if being white is the good thing, you're not white, and if being white is the bad thing, then you're white. And again, in terms of, some people say, they're supporting Palestinians because they're the underdog. Well, if you take the magnifying glass and you put it on Israel versus Gaza, Israel is stronger. If you expand it just a little bit, you see that Israel is surrounded by Lebanon, which is controlled by Iran, Syria, which is controlled by Iran. You expand a little bit more, Hamas is controlled by Iran, the jihad is controlled by Iran, the Houthis are controlled by Iran. You expand it a little bit more, you see the entire Middle East is Muslim, Arab, hundreds of millions of Arabs. Israel's tiny country, it's maybe 30,000 square kilometers. It's a teeny tiny country. It's maybe as small as one of the smaller European countries. And whatever strength Israel has, it does have strengths. It's outgunned compared to the Arab world, the Islamic world, the Iranian world. Numbers-wise, there's maybe, 2 billion Muslims and there's 15 million Jews. So if you do it by numbers and strength and amount of rockets and tanks and everything, Israel is small. And Hamas's allies are very strong. Iran is very strong, and Turkey is strong, and Qatar is strong. So it's a completely arbitrary decision on who you put in which side. And somehow the Jews keep getting put by these radical ideologues, get put in the wrong camp. And that's not a mistake. That's a decision on who they decide is the underdog. That's a decision they make.
You could also say that the only reason why Israel still exists is because of technology, because of Iron Dome. I had Itamar Marcus here, and he said that it's approximately 10,000 rockets been fired from Palestinian areas into Israel since the 7th of October. You have Iron Dome, so fortunately you do. But if you didn't, what would be left of Israel?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. To be in Israel when rockets are fired, it's something that people don't pay attention to. But can you imagine? I live in Geneva. Can you imagine if suddenly you open your phone where you hear sirens and rockets are landing on you? And in Israel, it's become a commonplace. And indeed, thankfully, the technology is able to stop many of them, but not all. And frankly, it's saved a lot of Palestinians, because if you would have more Israeli deaths, you'd have more Palestinian deaths, because the Israelis are trying their best not to harm civilians, and have waited weeks. The Americans, when they invaded various parts of Iraq and Syria, they didn't tell the civilians we're coming in a month and you have a month to leave. Israel did that, is trying not to hurt civilians.
I feel like a lot of people on the left, and unfortunately media here in Norway is kind of on that side. I feel like a lot of people are trying to place this reaction from Israel into the revenge narrative, like this happened on 7th October, so now Israel is just hammering indiscriminately the Palestinian areas, just bombing them just for revenge. Like, that's not at all. Could you explain what Israel is doing right now militarily?
Sure, absolutely. There is a narrative, indeed, as you said, that Israel is punishing Gaza and bombarding Gaza and trying to kill civilians. And you have people saying absurd things like genocide. And nothing could be further from the truth. The truth is that if you speak about genocide, the population of Arabs, not just in Israel, but in Gaza and the West Bank, have gone up dramatically since Israel entered these areas initially in 1967 and so forth. So there's no genocide. And Israel is not trying to bombard Gaza. Israel is trying to stop Hamas. On October 7th, there was a ceasefire in place for 2 years up until then, from the war of 2021. Hamas breached the ceasefire, invaded Israel, massacred men, women, and children in front of their families. And they said they're going to do it again. And they fired thousands and thousands of rockets. We're talking about millions of Israelis rushing into bomb shelters for weeks and weeks, day and night, rockets falling on them. And Israel's right and its duty is to stop the rockets and to end Hamas. Hamas said, we're going to do it again. The leaders of Hamas went on TV, said, we're going to repeat these massacres 1 time, 2 times, another time. Any other country, what would the United States do if thousands of rockets were being hit at them from a neighboring country? If someone broke in and killed, the equivalent in America would be tens of thousands of people mutilated right across their border in Mexico. They would crush that terrorist group and there would be no more of them. That's what America did to Al-Qaeda. It's what the international community did to ISIS. And these happened hundreds and thousands, not hundreds, thousands of miles away from Norway. Norway sent troops to Afghanistan, if I'm not mistaken. Canada sent troops to Afghanistan. These are thousands of miles away. We're talking about right across the border. This is this terrorist group standing right there, swearing to destroy them. Israel has to defeat Hamas so they can never do this again. That is what Israel's trying to do. Israel has teams of lawyers embedded in each military targeting decision saying, what is the target? Is it allowed in international law or not? Israel is conforming with the laws of war, conforming with the Geneva Conventions, conforming with international humanitarian law. There has to be a valid military target. And they examine what is the civilian collateral damage, because Hamas is embedding themselves deliberately in mosques, homes, hospitals, and schools. And Israel tries its best not to harm civilians. And that's why they gave several weeks, told the Gaza civilians, we're going to target Hamas in the north, please leave. When Hamas came and raided kibbutzim and killed families, they didn't say civilians were coming, please leave. They went to kill civilians. Israel is doing the opposite. Israel should be pointed out as an example on how to conform to international humanitarian law in terrible, challenging circumstances when the enemy is cynically firing at your civilians from a civilian area. It's a double war crime. So Israel, in everything that's been happening, is trying to target Hamas. Tragically, because they are situating themselves deliberately in civilian areas, there are civilian casualties. That is a tragedy of war. Just as when America went after ISIS in Mosul and Raqqa and other places, many civilians were killed. And in all wars, sadly, it happens. But Israel is not trying to kill civilians. If they wanted to, Israel had thousands of sorties, of flights, and thousands of targets. If they wanted to kill civilians, there would have been, 1 million civilians killed or more. They're not trying to kill civilians. And the numbers that we do have, whatever the number is, the numbers that Hamas puts out are 10 to 15,000. Even if those numbers are true, the question is how many combatants? Is it 5,000 combatants? Is it 7,000 combatants? The ratio of combatants to civilians will say something, and we won't have those numbers for a long time. But suffice it to say that in past conflicts, Israel has never killed more civilians, ratio-wise, civilians to combatants. Israel has never killed more civilians than Western countries. The contrary, the ratio of combatants to civilians killed has always been a much, I don't know, it's a larger ratio, but more combatants to civilians have been killed by Israel than in other Western conflicts where they've killed more civilians than combatants. When the Western countries were fighting in Syria and Iraq, they killed way more civilians in Afghanistan and so forth. So I think that's not the narrative that's being shared with people.
It's also an important point that you were mentioning that Hamas said that this wasn't just a one-off. They said it would repeat this over and over and over again. And also I want to recognize today, as we sit here and speak, there's been an attack in Jerusalem where unfortunately a 24-year-old woman was killed and also 2 elderly people, as I read. What do you think about this continuing? And Hamas has officially accepted responsibility for it and said that it was them.
Yeah, very sad, very tragic. As I said, I was just in Jerusalem about 7 weeks ago, and I have family and friends there, so it's very scary to see that. Israel has always had terrorism. When I meet with some Norwegian officials, they say, well, there's a context, there's a background. They kind of hint that maybe something Israel did provoked it. This kind of terrorism, it didn't start now. It didn't start with when Israel imposed sanctions on Hamas. It started when it's going back more than 100 years, when Jews started moving back to the Holy Land in the early 1900s. The Arab reaction was massacre. It would be the equivalent of Arabs moving to London and Berlin and Oslo, and Norwegians saying, we don't want you here and we're going to kill you because you don't belong here and we're going to attack you. So you had terrorism in Jerusalem and Hebron, where you had the massacre of 1929. There was no occupation. It was some poor, pious, ultra-Orthodox Jews who were living in Hebron, not bothering anyone, not occupying anyone, just living in a few homes, and they were massacred by Arabs in Hebron. And it's the same jihadi attacks. There was rape, there was mutilation. So we've seen it for 100 years. And sadly, there are some today in Europe who will say, yes, but there's a context, there's a history. It's Israel did this, Israel provoked them.
It's terrible.
If terrorism tells us anything, there's never a justification.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's the stupidest things that people say in the media. Like when you say there's been a terrible terror attack, and then they respond like, "Yeah, but this didn't happen in a vacuum. You need to remember that the context and the back. Yeah, but we had our own terrorist attack here in Norway in 2011 at Utøya with a guy named Breivik who killed a lot of young people, and nobody then was saying, yeah, but remember this didn't happen in a vacuum. Yeah, let's think about his backstory, his childhood. Nobody said that because there's free will. You're responsible for your own actions, regardless of what has happened in your life, regardless of everything in your context, in your atmosphere, and where you live. Regardless, you have free will. Nothing can justify killing babies. Nothing. Doesn't matter.
It is shocking, and indeed, you said about Oslo. If we think about Bataclan, London, Madrid, 9/11. No one said afterwards, yeah, well, there are grievances, and they've listed grievances, and we have to look at those grievances. As you said, they have free will. If Jews would start opening fire on Germans in the 1960s or 70s, not long after the Holocaust, I think people would rightly condemn such actions. And it didn't happen. People have free will, and it's shocking that anyone would ever find any justification for any kind of atrocity.
Yeah, it's like, and people try to explain it away with saying things like, yeah, remember they're living in what's close to an outdoor jail, and their families, and they're poor, and yeah, so what? How is that a justification for going out and killing Israeli babies? It's like almost an analogy to it is like a depressed pilot of an airplane. Yeah, you could think his life was so bad, he was depressed, so he just had to crash that plane with 180 passengers. Like, if your life was so bad, then don't drag a lot of people in it with you.
There is a moral failure here, something very pathological with that kind of response, indeed.
How much of this, because we're going to wrap it up because you're going to go to the airport soon,
yes,
so we have a few minutes, but I wonder how much of this is actually Iran disguising as Hamas, disguising as Palestinian Authority. How much is this like, I've heard somebody describe it as an octopus, where Hamas is just one of the arms of the octopus,
yes,
which is Iran.
Yeah, no, clearly Iran is a major factor here. Everything that's happening in the Middle East, we see Iran supporting the terrorists of Hezbollah in the north of Israel and Lebanon. Iran is arming, training, and sponsoring Hamas. They have Houthis firing missiles at Israel from Yemen. We have Hezbollah militias in Iraq. So indeed, the octopus is spreading across the Middle East, and the head of the octopus is in Tehran. They are against any kind of normalization. Obviously, what happened is in some ways a way of stopping advance for peace. They had the incredible prospect of peace with Saudi Arabia, one of the most important Islamic countries, the custodian of the mosques in Mecca. The idea that they would make peace with Israel would symbolically be a kind of an end to the Arab-Israel conflict. And clearly Iran wanted to stop that. Hamas has its own motivations. They have their own radical ideology, which they established long before Iran. So they each have their own motives, but Iran is no way Hamas could have done all of what they did without Iranian training, arms. It was a very sophisticated attack. They have, to be able to build mock kibbutzim, which they did, and have the drone technology and the sophistication and the organization and the tunnels. Clearly, the Iranian sponsorship was extremely significant. And it's hard to imagine that Hamas would have undertaken something like this without approval of their main patron. So I think Hamas is an independent actor, but Iran is a major sponsor of theirs. And that is the threat in the Middle East. Iran is getting stronger and stronger. And, Biden administration is a bit timid. We see America gets attacked. Their American assets in Syria and Iraq get attacked by Iranian militias, and they don't really respond. They respond very, very belatedly and very weakly. So Iran is becoming stronger and stronger, and it's a threat to the region. If and when they get a nuclear bomb, it's a threat to Western civilization.
Do you fear that the Lebanon and Hezbollah will enter this war in a grand scale?
Yeah, we do. I mean, whatever Hamas capabilities have, Hezbollah has much more. They have 150,000 missiles. They can reach anywhere in Israel. They can do great damage. They are smart missiles so they can reach specific targets. There is tremendous fear in Israel if Hezbollah would get involved. But Hezbollah should fear as well because Israel is not going to allow it. And there'd be terrible suffering in Lebanon. Hezbollah has treated Lebanon the way Hamas treated the people of Gaza, with a disdain. They use it as a military base and they embed themselves in civilian areas. So there would be tremendous suffering in Lebanon. There'd be tremendous destruction. Iran would, of course, lose one of their cards. The card of Hezbollah is to deter Israel from attacking their nuclear program. So the Iranians are not sure how to play this card. So far, Hezbollah is pushing it to the limits. They've been attacking Israel. They've fired rockets. They've killed people in Israel. They managed to send tens of thousands of Israelis moved away. You have maybe it's 100,000 or 200,000 Israelis displaced from the north, from the south, who can't live next to the border because of Hezbollah. So we've come very close to a larger war. And Israel may decide that they can't continue to live this way, to live in fear of what's just across the border, and maybe Israel will act preemptively. There are some in the military who apparently have called for that, which is understandable. So we'll have to see what happens in the north.
Hillel, thank you so much for joining me here, and thank you so much for your time. And I wish you and the Israeli people and the Jewish people all the best. Really hope that somehow we can find peace and prosperity and live our lives safely and happily.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Thank you.